Good morning, Mark.
Good morning, Donald.
How are you?
I'm good, thanks. And you?
Yeah, I'm good. I mean, the sun's shining here, but it's -3.
So I think it's it was -8 this morning.
-8. Wow.
Yeah.
Still, it's winter, so we get this. Yeah. Let me thank you very much for agreeing to participate in the Forgotten Generations story. Yeah.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much. It's not always easy to get people like yourself to actually sit and tell us a bit about their life. So we're going to go into some questions, and you just freely answer as you will. And I'm going to start off with your background, where your birthplace and parents and siblings, etc. Over to you, sir.
So I was born in North London. I was born at the Royal Free in Hampstead. So I'm an NHS baby, very proud of that. My dad was Windrush. He wasn't on the Windrush, but he came in 1958 on a banana boat, I think it was. They used to have 6 berths on the boat, so they'd bring a few passengers each time along with a shipment of bananas. So he came on a banana boat, and he met my mom in teachers training college. He came to study as a teacher, so they met in teacher training college. I actually have a photograph of the party where they met, but they hadn't met yet, so they're facing different directions in the photograph back to each other. And apparently
interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, so I was literally, my life began there in that party. So
I like that.
The potential for it began there. So so I started growing up in North London. I was, as you can see, very light-skinned, mixed race, and in the 1960s, that wasn't a good thing to be. You got it from both sides, really, and Dad decided that he wanted to move back to Jamaica. When the PNP came into power, he was quite sort of politically, he wasn't politically active, but he was quite politically keen. So when the PNP we moved to Jamaica.
Were you an only child then? When you...
Younger brother, Dean. So
was born here as well.
So I was about 13 when we moved to Jamaica.
Oh, okay. I see. So was it your father or parents politically driven? Why they?
To a degree. I wouldn't say my dad's heavily political, but he had a lot of hope for the future of Jamaica at that point, and
okay.
There was a lot of change in the air. Michael Manley, democratic socialism, trying to look after the poor, that sort of ethos.
Right.
My mom was more political. She was a sort of a proper left-wing, ban the bomb. In Jamaica, she ended up working on death row, teaching literacy classes to death row inmates.
Is that right?
Kingston, yeah. So she's English woman.
Yes.
Yes. So that's the kind of person she was, so Greenpeace.
Wow. So you actually moved to Kingston when you went back to Jamaica?
To Kingston, yeah. So I went to secondary school there. All
right. So how much of a difference did you experience between growing up in London up to 13 and then going to Jamaica? What was the contrast?
Well, it's interesting. So there are different facets to that. The first thing that affected me was the fact that the Jamaican educational system was a lot more rigorous than the system I'd experienced in London. I found that I was behind the rest of the class in terms of in almost every dimension, really, and I found it quite difficult initially. I actually failed my O-levels the first time around. I had to repeat that year. I did okay in the end. In the end. But I really felt behind. I was left behind. So that was interesting.
Can I just interrupt you there?
Yeah.
And say that I interview a lot of people, but mostly people who leave the Caribbean and come here to Jamaica, and they say exactly the opposite to what you're saying.
They were ahead.
Yes. Sorry, carry on.
When we talk about my great uncle in the RAF, that was his experience as well.
Okay.
He was quite far ahead with mathematics and trigonometry and so on when he arrived.
Right.
So the Caribbean, there's a bit of a inferiority complex in some people in the region, but actually the standards in many respects are as high or even higher than you find in so-called first world countries. Not across the board, obviously, but on the opportunities you've had there. So that was the first thing that struck me. And then the other thing that struck me was that, so we one of the main drivers for leaving the UK was that we're getting a lot of stick, racist prejudice in 1960s London. You know, black father, white mother. They couldn't walk down the street together in some situations because they get verbal abuse for being.
Wow.
Yeah, and then I got abused. At one point, I had to be escorted home from school by a police officer.
Is that right?
For about 3 months. I was probably about 11, and there'd been so much bullying that the school called the police in, and they sent a London Bobby, I don't forget it, the tall hat and everything, to walk me home every day, pick me up at school. My mum was teaching, you see, and dad was working, so there was no one to pick me up. So,
oh my goodness, that's quite an experience for a young man, isn't it? For a young boy at school to be.
But that's why I went into uniform. That's what that was the reason I went into uniform.
Okay, we'll talk about that later. That's amazing.
It's the same police officer every day. Big tall fella, hold my hand, walk me home, and then I was like, I'm going to be a big tall fella in uniform.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing.
Outcome. Yeah.
Wow. So
there was a gang of kids who used to chase me down the street, and in North London. And this is in Hampstead, by the way, not even like a rough part of London. This was a nice part of London. And I still got this gang of kids. And I can remember there was a circle of them around me once, just chanting. You can imagine the chants. And I remember these school mums, all sort of gasping in horror. And I think they must have said something to the school, because it was just after that incident that this police officer turned up.
Wow. So wasn't there wasn't an interaction between your parents and the school, so as a complaint?
There's no way.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Wow. I guess you didn't miss that then, going off to Jamaica.
Well, the thing is, I got to Jamaica and now I'm a brown man, right? Or a red man, in fact.
Red man.
And I'm getting stick left, right, and center for being too light skinned. Yeah. So it was the same. I would say there was literally no difference between the two levels of racism.
Oh my goodness.
The only difference was that as a red man, brown man, whatever you call it, no offense to anybody listening, that's what I call
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
That's a popular phrase. I was treated better.
Right.
When I'm an adult and I walk into the bank, for example, it was very embarrassing. They tried to pull me out of the queue and give me special service.
Isn't that amazing?
1970s, right? They'd be, oh, come over here, sir. And they'd open a teller window for me.
Wow.
I'd be like, no, I'm good, I'm fine in the queue. And they'd be like, no, come on. And I no, I'm fine. Because I don't want to walk across the banking hall and get special treatment on the basis of my skin color, right? So, but it was really complicated to get better treatment, but loads of lip. Yes.
I think that's the old colonialism kicking in there, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Isn't that's amazing to hear that, really.
That's changed. I don't get that anymore. I don't get much lip and I don't get any special treatment. In the 1970s, it was still, it was almost 1960s, really, because I went there 73. So, 60s have just gone, and that was still very much the mindset.
Wow. So did you have an ambition, apart from what you just said about being a tall a military person? Did you have any other ambition prior to leaving school?
You mean apart from the military?
Yeah.
No. In fact, I lie slightly, because I already wanted to be in the military before I met the police officer, but that kind of just reinforced it, because my granddad on my mum's side was a Royal Engineer officer during the Second World War, and my great uncle John Blair, the trigger for this interview, was obviously in the RAF. So on both sides, I had people in that generation that I knew well who'd served in World War II. So I think when I first met my headmaster in primary school, so I would have been 4. He asked me, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to be a soldier. And he said, I remember him saying, 4? At 4. And I remember him saying, we'll get that out of him, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. But he failed with that. So, yeah.
So had you met your granddad on your mom's side?
Yes, no, I knew my granddad very well. He used to teach me how to salute and how to march.
Oh, wow.
6 years old, yeah, I can remember that. Longest way up.
Oh, fantastic. So during your school years then, towards the end of it, you had nothing else in your mind other than becoming military?
Yeah, I never thought of anything else.
Oh, that's amazing.
So I prepared myself for that, and I took the subjects that I needed for that. And the day I got my O-levels, I walked down to Up Park Camp and joined the Jamaica Defense Force. My initial thinking had been I would join the British Army when I was growing up in Britain.
All right.
You're a kid, if you're a 17-year-old in 1970s in Kingston, the prospect of getting to Britain to join the forces is, pretty daunting. I just joined. My dad said, "Why don't you look at the JDF?" Nobody really looks at that option, and I did, and I'm glad I did. It was an excellent.
And what was that experience like?
That was mostly very. But mostly very good.
Can you repeat that, please? I lost you there for a little while.
Yeah. So that experience was mostly very positive. Okay. There were a few really negative bits because you lose friends, people who die in various circumstances. But apart from that, a hugely positive experience.
Did you feel as if that's really what you were thinking of, and did you feel fulfilled having done it?
Yes. So I did 6 years. So I was commissioned as an officer. So I went abroad and trained. So I was a temporary captain when I left. And I felt that was what I was designed to be at that stage of my life. That was the right profession, the right role. I was doing the thing that I loved. But then I got to a point where I was a bit too old for the running around because I love the physicality of it. Okay?
All right.
I love the operations. I love the mountains. I love the drill. I didn't like the office side of things. So as soon as I got to the age where they wanted to stick me in a comp commander's office, I left.
All right. And talking about adventure then, did you actually travel with the JDF?
So I traveled for training. I trained in India. So,
in India?
Yes, I went to the Indian Military Academy and I graduated there. So I was almost 2 years there.
Sorry, where were you in India?
In Dehradun.
Okay.
Which is in a province called Uttar Pradesh. So it's the north of the province borders on the Himalayas. So you've got jungle, desert, and mountains. So it's very good for training jungle warfare, desert warfare, and mountain warfare.
And was that a common thing for the JDF to send people to India to train?
Well, so JDF at that point would send all officers to train somewhere overseas, or regular.
Okay.
Not reserve officers, but regular officers. So you go to Sandhurst, or you go to Royal Marine Commandos, or you go to Canada, or you go to India, right? And then the pilots, of course, would go for further courses elsewhere. And I think the Coast Guard had separate training as well, something like that. So I was sent to India, which, when you were told India, you kind of sort of think, well, that sounds a little bit like second rate compared to Sandhurst. But I have to say that it was much more relevant to what we were going to do in Jamaica than perhaps Sandhurst. You go to Sandhurst, you're going to learn about Russian tanks on the North German plain.
Right.
Right. But in India, we were doing, jungle warfare, counterinsurgency, and everything. And I was going to do crime fighting and in Kingston against armed gangs, and I was going to do counter narcotics. So it was very, very relevant training. Wow,
that's very, very interesting. Wow. And did you feel very accommodated there by the Indians? Having sort of people from the Caribbean or elsewhere coming into their backyard, so to speak.
So they were very accommodating. They looked after us well. We were assigned, it's funny, the three of us from Jamaica, we'd already been trained as infantrymen. So we'd done the full infantry course before going abroad. And they didn't know that. Okay. They assumed that we had never been trained in anything. So they assigned us with this drill instructor for just the three of us. So everybody else was in groups of, 100. And then there was the three of us in one corner of the parade. Wow. And then he's teaching us how to stand to attention. And we just went along with it, right? He's teaching us, we stood to attention. He teaches us how to salute. So we saluted with precision on the first lesson. And he's teaching us how to step off and march and right turn, left turn, wheel, and about turn and everything else. And we did all of that perfectly. And he still didn't know that we'd been trained before. He thought his training technique was amazing. And the other instructors thought he was just brilliant as well. And they were coming over to watch. How did you achieve this in 24 hours? It's unreal. And of course, they're speaking Hindi. He didn't speak any English, right? And we spoke no Hindi. So we couldn't even explain to him if we wanted to, but we decided not to say anything. And they just
Are you serious? You couldn't understand each other?
These guys are like the best ever. Never seen this before. And and they saw us that way for quite some time until we let them see the reality. We're just normal.
Fantastic. So you mentioned about your other World War II relatives. served in the Royal Air Force, I believe.
That's right. So that's John Blair. I've actually got, I know I've moved it. I had his photograph here. I've moved it. But so John Jellicoe Blair, he was born in St. Elizabeth. He was, I think he was the third or fourth child, and quite younger than his siblings. And when the war broke out, 1939, he was a young teacher at a school in Kingston. He just graduated from MICO College, the famous teaching college in Kingston, which was operating then. I think it was one of the first teacher training colleges in the Caribbean, and remains, I think it's now a college or university, I think, at the moment, part of the university perhaps. So he was training there, and he listened to the news, and he was concerned. He listened to Churchill's speech just after Dunkirk. You know, we'll fight them on the beaches and on the landing grounds, and that's famous speech. And the great fear in Jamaica for many people was that, despite the fact that Jamaica was a colonial, holding of the British Empire, and many people objected to that and they wanted independence. Despite that fact, there was no doubt in their minds that a German defeat of Britain would make things far, far worse for the citizens of the empire overseas. That they knew that there were slaves. I don't know, a lot of people don't realize this. 25% of the European workforce under German rule, Nazi German rule, during the war, 25% of the workforce was slaves.
Wow.
In Europe, okay? Polish slaves, French slaves, Russian prisoners of war, Jewish slaves. So people knew that. They didn't necessarily know all the details of the Holocaust, but they certainly knew about the slave labor. And so the big fear in the Caribbean was that if the Germans won, then the Caribbean would return to slavery under German governance.
Oh, I see. Yes, yes.
It's a big motivation for people to volunteer. So they weren't just going for adventure. They were going to literally defend their own homelands against potential German victory.
Very, very interesting.
Got to bear in mind as well, this is before America entered the war. So Britain literally stood alone, and it didn't look good for Britain at that point. So there was a lot of fear about that.
That's very, very interesting, because a lot of people don't know some of the details that you just talked about there. Because
there's a misconception about, kind of Uncle Tom, sort of thing. You go to fight. Why are you doing that kind of thing? They weren't fighting for the empire. They were fighting for Jamaica, for Trinidad, for Barbados.
Yes, because I think also the Germans were in the Caribbean, weren't they? U-boats and that sort of thing.
Yes, there was a whole campaign. They had 15 U-boats, 15 submarines there, German and Italian. I think it's about 5, 6 German, the rest were Italian, and they were sinking ships all over the Caribbean, even bombarding oil refineries off the Venezuelan coast, bombarding installations at various points. Some submarines were sunk, and the survivors became prisoners of war in the Caribbean, along with other prisoners of war who were shipped down there. So there was a lot of World War II affected the Caribbean significantly.
Yeah. Did you get a chance to talk to your Johnny Blair? Was it your? Was it
John Blair, great uncle, my great uncle, my grandmother's brother.
Okay. Did you get a chance to talk to him?
Oh yeah, I interviewed him at length. I knew him for 40 years of his life.
Wow.
Yes, and we were very close, and I was the only other family member that he had contact with who had served in any military capacity.
Okay.
So we had that kind of bond. Two fellow servicemen. So he told me things that he had never told anybody else. And eventually I said, look, and it was 1997. I sat down with him and I recorded everything. It took me 14 years to finish writing the book because of life and work,
Yes.
But I interviewed him in 97. Actually 17 years. The book was published 2014. And and I've got probably, so I think I was there 2 or 3 times. I've probably got 6 hours of audio recorded.
Wow. So was he the main person why you wanted to write the book, or was it just history in general, or what?
No, when I spoke to him, because he didn't talk about it and nobody else talked about it. So when I spoke to him, and I think the reason people didn't talk about it is, one, servicemen tend not to talk to their families about their service, especially war servicemen.
Yes.
And also it became politically, delicate after the independence movements became very active, because they didn't understand. People didn't understand why you'd flown for the empire. So you didn't really go around telling people, "Yeah, I was a soldier of the empire." It wasn't seen as a positive, especially with
okay.
the power movement was active in the 60s, 70s.
Right. Yes.
Stuff going on. You got the racial issues in the US. You got issues in the UK. So it just wasn't a thing that you came out and say, "Yeah, I was an RAF man." You didn't do it.
Yeah.
Now it's fine. It's changed again. Now it's fine. But in that period, it wasn't something that you spoke about. And when I interviewed him, therefore, I thought he was the only one. I thought he was the only Black RAF airman. Right? He was a navigator. And so I sat down.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, I thought it was the only one. And you know what? The Curfew barracks where the ex-servicemen meet was next to my officers' mess.
Wow.
And I used to see them over there, and I didn't know who they were or why they were there. And I was there for 6 years. They never contacted us. We never contacted them. I had no idea these were all ex-RAF aircrew, right?
That's amazing.
So I interviewed him, and he was telling me, "Oh, you know Carl Chantrell. You work with Carl Chantrell at the telephone company." I said, "Yes." He says, "Yeah, he's RAF." I said, "What?" Carl? I said, "No, Carl. I used to run with Carl at the dam, at Mona Dam, in the reservoir."
Wow. Yes.
And he knew I was JDF. He never mentioned anything. So I suddenly discovered that all these people that I knew were actually, in that generation, were actually volunteers from the RAF, and that's why they're all friends with each other.
Oh my goodness.
And then I interviewed Carl, I interviewed Johnny Banks, I interviewed Mr. Jones, who was ground crew. Quite a few Second World War people, and read interviews that others had given who I didn't have access to. And it was I had no idea. So there were 495 that were identified, and the number's gone up since then.
So you must have got quite a bit of useful historic information from these different people then regarding their life in the RAF.
Not only in the RAF, life in Jamaica before the war, reasons for joining up, life in the RAF, life after the RAF as well, because they all had professions and careers after the Air Force. So it was very, very revealing. And a lot of time we don't talk to our elders.
No.
Most grandchildren can't say anything about their grandparents' careers or anything like that. They know granny can cook a nice pie, but that's about it. But these people all have lives. Everybody has a life to talk about, and if you don't ask them, they probably won't tell you because they don't want to bore you.
Question: did any of them mention about being given money or land after returning to the Caribbean?
I never heard that. No, never heard that.
Because I believe that was an agreement for serving, that people would get a piece of land, or other people that I've interviewed, another World War II veteran, said that he chose education. So he went on a course.
Education, yes.
To become an accountant. Yes, so that was his money used up, rather than getting a piece of land or whatever.
Okay, that may be in the offer, but I suspect, because everybody I spoke to got the education piece.
Oh, right.
They didn't mention it was a choice. So they became doctors, lawyers, accountants.
Oh, I see.
They went into politics with their degrees. The judges, there's judges, and there's all so they all kind of took that step up from RAF service to the professions.
Yes. I think a lot of these guys. Sorry? I think a lot of these guys were quite bright anyway, weren't they? Because they needed to be bright to get into the RAF.
Yeah, it's cream of the crop to get selected for any RAF role, right? So they're already bright, but they didn't have necessarily have access to that higher education in Jamaica in the 1930s. Okay.
Right.
Huge opportunity for you to go and get called to the bar, in central London and all that sort of thing, which would never have been an opportunity had there not been a war.
Wow.
It changed society. It changed society in the Caribbean. It created a class of experienced, mature, highly respected, decorated, well-educated leaders who returned home and in many cases became integral to the independence movement. Some became prime ministers. Okay?
Yes.
Manley was in the RAF.
Yes.
Was in Barbados. The prime minister of Barbados was in the RAF.
Absolutely.
And many others. And it changed the nature of the independence movement. It changed the nature of society to a degree that most people don't recognize in very positive ways.
Yes.
You look at someone like Arthur Wint. Okay, Arthur Wint, two-time gold medalist at the Olympics, 100 meters.
Yes,
okay?
yes.
Spitfire pilot in the RAF. Nobody knows about that. And the only doctor for 13,000 people in his parish. I think it's in St. Mary when he was a doctor, and trained because of the RAF service. So you think about the contribution that he's made to Jamaica in terms of its image, in terms of his medical service, and in terms of his contribution to its security and survival. And indirectly, therefore, to its independence. That's one life, but it's made a contribution across the board.
And sports.
And sport.
Yeah, because he was an Olympian.
The statue is still there outside National Stadium. Inspiration.
Well, and do you know Mr. Albert Jarrett, who recently passed?
I hadn't met him. I obviously know of him, a very well-known gentleman, but I sadly
right. Well, I talked to his wife on a regular basis, and prior to him passing, she told me that she was operated on by Arthur Wint.
Oh, there you go. Right? But these ripples, on the water, they spread all over the place, and you just need to drop a man here or a woman there. Of course, there were female volunteers as well, right?
Yes.
Drop someone there, and you can't measure how those ripples affect the whole of society.
Yes.
Time passes, they have a greater effect.
And talking about society, a lot of people don't appreciate that there are some people that served in their own country to support, Did you ever come across anybody who served to support UK, so to speak?
So I didn't come across directly, but I came across a Canadian soldier who was actually stationed in Jamaica. So at that time, many of the colonies, most colonies would have a British unit there as well as part of the structure. So he was one of these, in his case, Canadian regiment soldiers who was based in Newcastle in Jamaica, where I trained. I didn't meet him, but I read his account, and he talks about the local troops that they worked. Right. The fact that the local troops then took over those duties, so that the more mainstream British forces would be able to go back and fight in the various locations. So he mentions that, but that's the closest I came to that particular topic. I wasn't really focused on that. Social history as such. I was really focused on the RAF and the missions and the role of the Caribbean crew in the air. So
right. Recently, I learned much more about Ole Cross.
Yes.
He's believed to be the most decorated West Indian in World War II.
80 missions,
80 missions, absolutely. But his story is now being told in the school in Trinidad. Is that the case in Jamaica? Do you know that the history of our people have been told in the school?
I don't know. I don't think so. I have nephews who are still in school. They've certainly never mentioned anything. So, but I'm only guessing there, but I don't believe that to be the case, but I could be wrong. There is a book that came out recently for schools. I don't have it in front of me. You might have seen it. It's sort of fairly small, and that's got a reference in there. It's a witness, and it's got a reference.
Yeah.
Because the RAF Museum has its online exhibits, and they engage with schools in the UK. So they bring schools into the exhibit and tell them the story of the Caribbean. So sort of central, the urban kids come in and they learn this story as well. So there is outreach taking place. And I was involved with a school in Bath recently. They had for Memorial Day, Remembrance Day, there was an event at Bath Cathedral that school children had researched Commonwealth volunteers, 12 of them, including, and they stood up at the front of the cathedral. They had the military wives choir, the mayor, also everything was there, and big presentations and speeches and so on. And BBC, I think, captured parts of it. So there is certainly activity generally, but specifically in terms of Jamaica, I don't know.
Thank you. Well, the focus of the Forgotten Generations, this organization, is to ensure that the national curriculum is actually changed, updated on a widest basis to include Black history.
In Jamaica or in the UK, or just generally?
Generally. Yeah. But the focus is here in the UK to begin with, and then expand outwards.
Yeah.
because there are at least 29, 30 countries that's under the umbrella of the Forgotten Generations. So whatever template we set here is to expand that into these countries, to say, really, you need to get this kind of knowledge into the schools about, the contributions of the foreparents who paved the way for us as a people.
Very, very important. And I'll tell you what, my feeling, so the reason that I think that the RAF story is valuable is not because we're glorifying war. What we're doing is we're highlighting what happens if you don't stand up to fascism. We're highlighting the contribution that Black and mixed race people from the Caribbean and Africa have made to fighting fascism. We are justifying our presence here, okay? Because although everybody who came here didn't fight during the war, many came here to help reconstruct the country, okay?
Absolutely.
Related to the war. So, and we are providing role models for people who, in many cases, don't have good role models. So I think it's really important to do that. But there is an issue with people objecting. So I get people, African and Caribbean people, actually pushing back against me and saying, some of them saying this never happened.
Really?
Oh, yeah, I get emails, I get angry emails from people, Professor so-and-so, this never happened, it's all fabricated. This is propaganda. This is propaganda that the British devised, in the 1940s to make themselves look good in the colonial, reaches, right? So we get these kind of, which is nonsense. I mean, it's my great uncle, right? I knew him 40 years of his life. He's gazetted. I've got, his squadron remembers him. I'm invited to squadron dinners to give presentations about him to people who knew him during the war. Okay, so there's no question in my mind that this is a real thing. But people, people get fixated these days on topics, and they just research, and they find one photograph that might be a little bit off, and then that's the basis for our whole conspiracy theory. And it's just ridiculous.
I hear what you're saying, because the same happened here in UK. That kickback or lack of knowledge of the contribution of people in general, but especially of Black, African and Caribbean people. And the Forgotten Generation is about the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. And if you look at all three armed forces, you will find there's contributions in there from us as a people. But there are people who are kicking back, or just don't know that people actually contributed in World War I and II, and other conflicts.
Absolutely, yeah.
So when you say what you say there, I quite believe it, because I see it. And it's a matter of saying to them, here you are, there's proof.
Okay, so sticking with people from the Caribbean and Africa, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of people contributing. I mean, there were 2 African divisions in Burma. There were like 126,000 West Africans fighting the Japanese in Burma on behalf of.
Yes.
Never mentioned anywhere, right? So that's definitely the case. When you expand it outward a little bit, so for example, the Polish contribution, people don't understand. 25% of Western forces in Europe during the Second World War were Polish. Okay, 25% of all forces. On some days during the Battle of Britain, 100% of the aircrew were either Polish or Czech.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Absolutely.
Bomber command, 20% were Polish, right? So I actually write about the Poles as well, because I want to be inclusive. It's not just about,
Absolutely.
It's about
Absolutely.
served and you're now denigrated here, as the Poles are as well, and go home and so on. They saved this country. Okay?
Absolutely. And I've interviewed Zambians. I interviewed a gentleman in Zambia, and the story tells about the soldiers and how gallantry they were. They were very gallant in their fight in Japan and in Madagascar and everywhere else. And who knows about these people?
No, nobody. In fact, the Japanese used to run away. If they saw African troops, they were absolutely petrified. And the Japanese wouldn't run away from anyone, okay? Except African troops. They saw African troops coming. They're like, no, we're not fighting these guys, okay? So, You know, these are good soldiers, professional soldiers, very, very competent, brave
Yeah.
as you say, in the field. In some
Yeah.
cases, highest decorations, Sikhs
Yes.
winning the Victoria Cross. Okay, so you know, yeah,
absolutely. The unfortunate situation, what I've learned also by interviewing some of these people, is that the lack of support they were given after their gallantry service. It's like they were, you know, that's it. Thank you very much. Yeah, but there's no actual support, you know, financially.
we see the same thing today with Gurkhas. I think I've had that issue.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yes.
But what happened, for example, I focused on the RAF, so that's, I'll come back to that because I'm not expert in the other domains, and I'm sure the same is true in the other domains. The RAF, so as you know, there was the colour bar. Okay,
yes.
before, so you couldn't become an officer in His Majesty's Armed Forces unless you were British born and of pure European descent. So there were some officers, but they got a blind, you know what I mean, right? So
yeah,
become an officer officially. That was lifted in October 1939, and anybody could become an officer. Okay, you had to qualify, of course, but your racial background didn't matter. Absolutely. So we had black officers coming in. While the war was still in progress in 1945, it was evident that Germany was going to lose. Okay, but the war was still in progress. There were still black airmen in aircraft over Europe risking their lives. There were memos passing around the Air Ministry about how they're going to remove these black people from the officers' mess.
Is that right?
Oh, yes. The Air Ministry memos. I've got a copy on my system. And one of them, I'll send it to you later. One of them said, it's just unacceptable that we'll have people with names like, you know, Akim Bobo or whatever, right, in the officers' mess in peacetime. It's completely unacceptable. And therefore, we need to reinstate the colour bar. Now, it was never reinstated. And some of the black aircrew stayed in the RAF. My uncle stayed till 1963, okay? But many were told to leave. And there was this attempt by some parts of the institution to re-whiten the force, if you will, after the war. We no longer need these people. Let's clean it up, right? Was the attitude. Others, however, objected very, very strongly because they'd served with black and mixed race and Asian airmen and women, and they objected very strongly. So there was a fight within the Air Ministry and within the RAF, and it never really resolved itself. So some people stayed, some left, some were victimized to a degree, some were not. Some had very good experiences. It depended very much on where you were and you know how the system caught you at any point in time.
It's amazing, isn't it? So what influenced you then to become a historian?
Well, I mean, okay, so I've always been, so as I say, from the age of 2, I wanted to be in uniform. I've been reading history since I was a boy. I had Shira's Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, 800-page text when I was 10. My mom got it. I asked my mom to buy it for me. We went to the bookshop and she said, "What book do you want?" I was like, I want that 800-page history book. Looking back on it now is a bit weird, but she bought it. Mom was a teacher, no such thing. If my son was,
right, okay, yeah. That's my boy.
And I still have it.
Great.
With me through my whole life. This is nothing. I've got a whole thing for the book.
Library.
So I've always been interested in history, physics, society. So my uncle's story was a real trigger for me to do research and to write. And I've done a couple of things since. But yeah, that was the real driver for me. I haven't recently, to be honest, I haven't done anything recently. I've been very busy. I teach cybercrime and security, so I've been writing and researching that topic for the last many years. But
yes. I noticed that is that your company or what?
Right. Yeah. So I worked in organizations as a technical sort of network fraud security head for a number of decades. Ericsson, Alcatel, Cable and Wireless, of course, Nortel, and then I moved out, set my own business up, and I focus on training police officers primarily, and we do some work with lawyers with the Crown Prosecution Service or with the state prosecutors in Ukraine, training lawyers about cybercrime, how cybercrime occurs, and also something called open source intelligence, which is how do you do an investigation on the internet and discover various things from the internet. So you may have seen some of these catfishing films, that kind of thing. So it's in that sort of domain. So that's what I do, yeah, and that takes up most of my days.
That's quite a world. That's a world removed from most people, isn't it? I think, you know, because
yeah, I mean, it's very different from RAF history.
yes,
Yeah, so yeah.
wow.
But I can't do one thing. I need to have different topics.
Is that a story for another book then? Your cyber world, so to speak.
Possibly. I actually wrote a book, but it was years ago. I wrote a book about the telecom fraud, but probably, I'm looking at it right now, it's probably 20 years ago.
What? Wow.
It's published in the UK, but it's very outdated. I wouldn't suggest any. But I could potentially do another one maybe. But there are quite a few out there. I've got other people's books up here that on the same topics. I'm not sure there's really a demand for another one.
Well.
I want to write a novel one day.
Yes.
Feed on some of the things that I've learned. But
yes, this is why I mentioned it, you see, because your experience on a daily basis multiplied by, you know, the weeks and the months and the years. That's quite something, isn't it?
Do you want to hear about the drug control operations? That was interesting.
Yeah, please.
So how much time we got? You got time?
Yes, we got another. I've got another 15 minutes or so, but I won't restrict it.
Okay, so I'll just tell you about that because I think people would be interested in it, hopefully. Yeah. So I was involved in counter narcotics or drug enforcement operations in the Caribbean and Central America. So initially I was in uniform, and most of that involved DEA agents, so Drug Enforcement Administration, US agents doing intelligence work, and they would know, okay, a plane's going to be coming in at this time to this location, or a boat, or whatever it was, and then we wouldn't be told specifically what was happening. We'd be sort of ring fenced near the airstrip in the military base, and then they would just be like, go, and we'd get into 3 or 4 helicopters, and when we were airborne, of course, there's no mobile phones in those days. So once we're airborne, you can't communicate with anyone. And then they'd give you like aerial photographs and a brief. You put a headset. So I was the officer in charge. So I get a headset on. Everybody else is just sitting there. And I get the briefing. Okay, it's going to be a Cessna, twin engine, blah, 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 blah. This is the registration of the aircraft. It's going to come in from the west at this time and land at this location. And then our job is to be there hidden, to get there first. So they drop us off some distance away, move in covertly, stay hidden, because it's not the aircraft you want, it's the people shipping drugs. So you need to wait till the aircraft has landed and the convoy with the narcotics has arrived. Sometimes, by the way, that convoy had police cars front and back. Okay.
Really?
Yes, armed police escort. Okay, with M16s and everything, escorting the narcotics to the aircraft. Okay, on occasion, not every time, but on occasion. And they've got this American pilot, he comes out. They always have like the night vision goggle thing on their head, and he comes out, and then the narcotics are being loaded. You need to wait till they're loading the aircraft before you arrest them.
Evidence.
Yeah, otherwise they're not shipping.
Oh, right, okay.
So you want to prove that they're shipping because there's a higher level offense and the penalties are more severe. So we'd wait in the bushes off to the side of the airstrip, and then we'd move in. And then that was always an interesting part, because sometimes we'd run in and they'd see us coming, okay? And sometimes we'd literally this is broad daylight, okay? But you'd literally just walk in, just saunter in. There's like 40 of us, okay? From 3 or 4 directions. You just walk in very slowly and quietly. And there were occasions when you get literally right up to them and they haven't seen or heard you, because you've got rubber boots, jungle boots and everything else. You're in camouflage gear, and you just say, you're supposed to say, don't move, hands up. Sometimes you just say, boo.
Got you.
And policemen just drop their guns. Okay. They're not going to shoot you. They're not going to shoot at you. There's like 40 of you, right? So
sorry. So who are you? Were you a team of? I can't remember if you said you were military or non-military, or you're just a private enterprise.
Jamaica Defense Force. Jamaica Defense Force.
Okay.
So we're doing all the jobs. And if you watch, people say, Jamaica, Defense Force. Actually, we were doing more physical hands-on operations on a day-to-day basis than most military units. It's a constant battle. Okay, we lost a lot of people doing that. Not so
Really?
many in the Defense Force, more in the police, but some in the Defense Force as well. And if you watch Narcos, the series, which is a very well-researched series, it's based on actual DAA agents writing their stories, okay? Narcos actually references us. So Narcos Mexico, if you ever watch that, I highly recommend, I think it's 3 seasons of Narcos, right? One's Colombia, one's Mexico, and then I can't remember the other one. But Narcos Mexico, they actually say in the series, now that the Caribbean route has been closed to Pablo Escobar's transshipment of narcotics, we need to go through Mexico. Okay, and that's a historical fact. And we closed that route.
Wow.
You know, I wasn't doing strategy. I was just jumping out of helicopters. But we closed that route. I was there, and we did it successfully. And we didn't take bribes, and we didn't take drugs off the people and sell them or any of that nonsense. We closed it down professionally, effectively, and it remains closed to this day. And they still transship through Mexico.
Fantastic. But like you say, that was quite a dangerous thing to be involved in, wasn't it? Because I mean, these guys wouldn't take prisoners, would they?
No, I mean, I lost a very, very good friend of mine, was a pilot, and it's all public record, Donald Poulton, and his co-pilot was called, funnily enough, Harold Wilson, like the Prime Minister, so named after.
All right.
And then there was Dudley Chin, who was in the back. So 3 of them on a training flight. And they saw a drug aircraft about to take off from an illegal airstrip, and they decided they were going to circle down and land and block the strip so the aircraft couldn't take off.
Okay.
Which they did. And then the American pilot, twin-engine plane, deliberately drove his craft so that the propeller went into the cockpit of the
my goodness. Wow.
Killed Harold instantly. Donald burned to death, and Dudley was badly burned but injured. He escaped alive. Dudley went spent 6 months in the burns unit, came back, volunteered to fly again, and crashed and burned on his first operational flight.
No. My goodness.
Was destined for that fate. And I still think about it I think about it regularly, actually. I gave it a bit of PTSD, to be honest.
Yes.
Every Remembrance Day, I think about them.
Wow. Because that's
got a funeral thing, I laminate it, I keep it in a drawer.
Because that's the thing about being in such a world, isn't it? Be it military on the front line, or dare I say the police and whatever. When you experience that kind of thing, you really it's unforgettable, isn't it? Indelibly in your mind and race.
I know about. I think I counted one. I know about 35 people who died violently.
Really?
I was doing a tally. It's really scary when you're doing a tally and there are people that you'd completely forgotten about, and then you're going through and you're like, oh yeah, what about so and so, and you put them on the mental list as well. So you've known people who died violently and you've forgotten about them. Because there's so many on the list. So that's what happens there. So I wasn't, the RAF aircrew, much more severe losses.
Yes.
Huge percentage of losses over time. So I can't, nothing to compare with that, but it gives me some insight into what.
Yes. I can only imagine. We can only imagine all the way across on his 80 missions.
I know. Just.
Oh my goodness.
I know I couldn't do that.
That is phenomenal.
I've done enough to know what I can and can't do.
Right.
I could deal with being an infantry officer.
Right.
Would never have been in an RAF aircraft in World War II. I would say no, just put me in infantry. I can't deal with this. I just no.
Amazing. So Mark, what's on your radar now? Anything planned for the future as such that you can talk about, or you just do what you're doing?
So obviously business is going on. It's very busy. That's great. But here's my view of business. I don't do business so money is not my motivation.
All right.
Money is like petrol. Right? The business is the car, and money makes the car go. But I'm not interested in the money. I'm interested in where the car is going. It's a journey. I'm trying to make some money to allow me to drive to my destination. And my destination is helping people. And so almost all of the profit from the business goes into various charitable projects. But I don't give to charity. I do the projects myself.
So that's interesting.
I did a small. It is a small project. We're a small company. I have 5 people, right? But I was taking wheelchairs to Nigeria, for example, when I was working in Lagos. I found a home for disabled children, and every time I flew down, which is like once a month, I take 3 or 4 wheelchairs as my baggage. And,
Okay.
now I'm working with Ukraine. So there's a refugee center in Lviv, and I've been driving out there in my spare time with generators and adult pampers and various other things that they need, and just driving literally the length of Europe, delivering to Lviv. I got back a couple of weeks ago. I'm going again. There's someone picking up actually from my house on Saturday.
Wow.
Apologizing about boxes possibly being in the background. I've got generators and all sorts of stuff right here in the corridor. And then I'm going out myself again in January with another shipment, and we just drive across Europe. We drive into Ukraine, we deliver to Lviv. I'm going to spend 4 days volunteering there. And my future ambition is to continue to run my business, but to have a permanent presence in Ukraine, because what's happening there is just unspeakable. And it's going to need 20 to 30 years of rebuilding and very importantly, psychological support, because you have 40 million people who are traumatized and missile attacks and have lost relatives and suffer PTSD. So I'm working with a medical team there, and we're talking about, what can we do after the war has ended to help people, and what can we do technically? Is there a way we can use technology to reach people, to provide them with counseling and group sessions and so on? Because it's going to be, it's just there's never going to be the numbers of professionals to do that face to face. So that's my goal, is to see if we can create an app and WhatsApp groups and web pages and advice and guidance. It'll low budget but effective, hopefully, and just that's my future. That's my future mission.
Wow, that is so commendable, because
you know what, it's what my great uncle did.
Okay,
it's what he did. He stood up because there was a huge threat to civilization, and I believe that Russia today is a threat to civilization, and I want to look him in the eye when I meet him again. So I don't want to fight. I don't want to be involved in violence.
Yes.
So helping refugees is the best alternative.
And there's so much of a need for that. It's just
millions. 20% of the Ukrainian population has left Ukraine since the war started. 20%.
Wow, that's amazing.
7.4 million people.
Right. Well, I've got to commend you, sir, and your team, and what you're doing, and your future vision. And
on your project, which I'd love to assist if there's a way to assist you. And is a really important project. So just let me know.
Oh, I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. And thank you so much for taking part in this, telling a story, because I think it's very important to get out there, especially things that you've mentioned, because there's a lot of things that you say that people don't know about. And a lot of people don't read, because writing a book is very central, but, a lot of people prefer to press a button and watch a video or listen to something. So that's why the Forgotten Generation is actually creating the visual side of things, So I really appreciate your contribution today. Thank you so much for this. Yeah.
It's been a pleasure and an honor. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Mark. Really appreciate it. And take care.
Take care, Donald.
Thank you.